I am Sarah Mastroni. I'm a program officer at Ocean Visions. I'm very delighted to be here today speaking with you about marine carbon dioxide removal and Africa. I am based in the United States. I live in Alaska, which has a slightly different climate than what we're experiencing here. This is actually the warmest I think I've been in months, and I know it's winter here. But anyway, so very excited. I am going to give an overview of marine carbon dioxide removal. Can I just raise your hand if you're familiar with this concept? Yeah? Okay, awesome. So a few familiar, some new. I'm gonna kind of do like a science 101. So this is gonna be a little bit like being back in the classroom. Just quick and dirty, what it is, why we care, why this might matter. And then I am joined today by 3 experts across disciplines, governance, research, policy, science, innovation. And we're gonna have a discussion about not only why this might matter, but why this is important for Africa for this conversation today and this week as well. So let's jump right in. So we live on a blue planet. The ocean is the pacemaker of the Earth's heat cycles and its carbon cycles. Overheating and carbon imbalances in the atmosphere actually mean overheating and causing carbon imbalances in the ocean. And so about 90% of the excess warming from greenhouse gas emissions ended up in the upper ocean. And in this way, the ocean has done us an enormous favor, right? If it hadn't absorbed all this excess heat, we would be boiling right now. However, this has come with consequences. The first one being thermal stress. So ocean warming is responsible for marine heat waves, decreased ocean mixing, and sea level rise. So the ocean is the engine to power storms. So more heat in the upper ocean leads to more powerful storms. Warmer waters are responsible for decreases in sea ice and increased melting and the loss rates of ice sheets. And it's also causing a lot of marine animals to actually move from the equator to the poles. So we're getting a shift in marine organisms as well. And it's not just the heat stress that we're seeing, we're also seeing chemical stress. So the ocean is not only absorbing this excess heat that we're trapping in the atmosphere, it's also absorbing the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere. And so the ocean and the atmosphere actually want to be in equilibrium with each other. So what we're doing right now is we're putting too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The ocean actually naturally starts taking some of this up, and that causes this phenomenon called ocean acidification, which I think we are all probably familiar with at this point. The acidity has increased in the ocean by about 30%. This has enormous consequences for the ocean and the things that live in the ocean, particularly organisms that use carbonate as their shell building materials. These are organisms like clams and mussels, as well as things like corals. And the ocean has actually already absorbed 26% of the carbon dioxide emissions that we've emitted since 1750. So again, this is the ocean sort of acting like a sponge. Again, this is kind of good for us, right? This means that all of this pollution is not right here in the atmosphere, but it's pretty bad news for the ocean, and as a result, the people who rely on it. Collectively, we have delayed action for so long on emissions reductions that now we have to also look at actively removing emissions from the atmosphere. And this removal is needed for 2 reasons. One, it has to be used to balance emissions from hard to abate sectors like aviation, where we expect to be using fossil fuels still for a bit longer. And 2, it's the only tool that actually removes past carbon dioxide pollution from the atmosphere, right? So even if we were to stop emitting greenhouse gases right now, we still have this backlog of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So this is a tool that we can use to remove them. The State of CDR Report, second edition, which was released last summer, calls for between 7 and 9 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal per year by the middle of the century to stay within the Paris Agreement goals of limiting warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. This includes conventional carbon dioxide removal, which is primarily forest management. So we know that trees, as they grow, they actually take in CO2, they produce oxygen. This is a very common and natural way that we can absorb CO2. This is sort of a conventional method. What I'm going to be talking about is one of the more novel techniques, or something that's not as well understood and not deployed as largely. So we have about 2.1 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal that's happening every year today. Again, that's being done almost entirely through these conventional sources. And so, as I was saying, we're at 2.1, we need to get to 7 to 9, which might seem like these are small numbers, right? 2, 7, but we're talking about gigatons of carbon. And this is actually a huge quantity, So we are talking about massive amounts of additional storage here. And so to get there, we have these conventional methods that we've been using for a while and we will continue to use, but a lot of people have been now wondering, are there other things that we can do? Are there other places that we can look for answers here? And this brings us to the ocean. So the ocean is the largest reservoir of carbon in the global carbon cycle. So it makes sense, as we are pondering these questions about there being too much carbon in one place, that we would actually think about the ocean as a place to store this carbon. And as an example, just to sort of give you a sense of scale here, if we were to sequester into the ocean all of the anthropogenic carbon dioxide pollution that's currently in the atmosphere, it would increase ocean dissolved inorganic carbon by less than 1%. So it would actually be a drop in the bucket for the ocean. And that's just to say that the ocean is huge, right? We live on this blue planet. It has huge potential, huge capacity for storage. And so that is why we are asking these questions. Can we actually enable it to store more? This is a diagram that shows some of the methods that are being proposed right now. And they sort of fall into 3 categories. You can use biology, you can use chemistry, or you can do something called direct capture. So the first one is using biology. So we all know that trees photosynthesize, right? They capture carbon. We have similar things going on in the ocean. We have aquatic plants such as mangroves, seagrasses, salt marshes. We also have seaweeds, which are not plants technically, but they do function in this way that they also take up CO2, they sequester it in their structure, and then that carbon is then either deposited on the seafloor, eaten by organisms, remineralized, etc. So we can use biology and photosynthesis in this way to increase carbon capture. The other method that we would look at is chemical. So the ocean is sort of like a giant chemistry experiment. It's very complicated, but what we're seeing, to sort of really simplify it, we are seeing that it's becoming more acidic, right? When you have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it dissolves into the water and creates a more acidic water, essentially. And so what people are asking is, what if we added something that's basic or alkaline to counteract that acidity? And so you can do that in a number of ways, but you're essentially taking something that is very basic or alkaline and adding it to the ocean to have this neutralizing chemical reaction. And then the third way is more of a direct capture way. So many of us are familiar with direct air capture, which are the like giant fans on land that are actually able to pull carbon dioxide directly from the air. We can actually do a similar thing in salt water. You can actually directly take the carbon dioxide out of the seawater. So an overview, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about each of these. So our first method that people are investigating is called ocean alkalinity enhancement. This general idea is we're taking materials that are alkaline, we're crushing them up into a fine dust or powder, and you're adding this to the ocean, which enhances its ability to sequester more CO2. Materials include olivine, silicate rocks, limestone, other carbonate minerals. There are a few ways of doing this. You can do this in the open ocean, so that would mean taking these materials out into the open ocean, depositing them there. You can also enhance beaches and shorelines with these materials, so you'd put that on the beach, and then as waves crash and take the sand out into the ocean, you have that effect happening in that way as well. And to give you sort of a real life example, there's this company based in Canada called Planetary, and that is exactly what they're doing. They're doing it in a very interesting way, though. They're actually using existing infrastructure like wastewater treatment centers, because these are places where we already have this inflow and outflow of water. So what they're doing is they're taking advantage of what's already there and then adding alkaline materials to that. They have field trials going on right now in Nova Scotia and also in the US in the Elizabeth River. Our next method that people are looking into is called electrochemical ocean carbon dioxide removal. This is where we're actually, this one sounds very sci-fi. This one is where you're actually using electricity to split ocean water into component parts, an acid and a base. You're then taking the acidic stream and removing it. The basic stream goes back into the ocean. This technique is sometimes referred to as direct ocean capture, and this usually happens on land. So as you can see in this, these are shore-based facilities, and one of the benefits of this is it's actually a closed system. So as you can imagine, any process that happens in the ocean is very, very hard to track and monitor, right? As soon as you put something in the ocean, it's huge. If you were asked to then try and track what you just did in that ocean, it's really hard. And so one of the advantages to this method is that what you're adding is actually in a closed system, so it's much easier to measure and then to actually understand what the impact you've had is. A real life example of this being done right now is a group called Aquatic. They are doing direct capture, converting the acidic CO2, converting it into a solid carbonate. And this is happening at the Port of LA in Los Angeles, California. This is another example of sort of co-locating one of these field trials with existing infrastructure. So the Port of Los Angeles is a huge port. They have amazing access to the water and to land-based infrastructure. So just another example of this sort of cooperation that can happen to try and make these trials occur. Okay, next we have macroalgae or seaweed cultivation. The general idea here is we, of course, have natural seaweed forests in the water. And the question is, if we were to actually grow more of these kelp forests in the ocean and then do something with that biomass, with the seaweed, could we actually sequester meaningful amounts of carbon? So people are talking about growing kelp, and this is something that has been done for a very long time for food products and other products that we use every day. So there's a lot of knowledge, there's a large knowledge base around how to do this. The bit that we don't know as much about is instead of just letting that seaweed grow and fall off and die and do whatever kelp does in the ocean, we actually want to harvest that kelp and do something with it that would actually store the carbon in it. And when we talk about doing this on a large scale, you can imagine this is a lot of seaweed we're talking about. So do we sink it to the bottom of the ocean where it could stay for thousands of years? Can we create bioproducts that are actually utilizing that biomass and making something like building materials, bioplastics, fabrics? How do we actually utilize it? So those are the questions there. There's actually an African group in Namibia that is doing this. They're called Kelp Blue. They grow giant kelp, and they use that kelp after they harvest it for a variety of different products. And some of these include this sort of long-term carbon capture that we're talking about with MCDR here. Our next technique that we have is called microalgae cultivation. So people are often familiar with giant kelp, seaweed in the ocean, but then if you go all the way down to the tiny scale, we have microalgae, which are these single-celled algae organisms, but they do the same thing. They photosynthesize, so they're also removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And they are interesting because you can actually spark their growth by adding their limiting nutrient to the ocean. So these guys rely on macro and micronutrients to grow. And if you add a little bit of their limiting nutrient, you can actually get a big bloom of them happening. So one of the most common limiting nutrients to microalgae is iron. Iron is something that is very readily available. It's relatively inexpensive and easy to transport. So people have thought, okay, can we go out and sprinkle some iron into the ocean and encourage this bloom of algae? After the algae lives its life cycle, which is very short, it would then sink to the bottom of the ocean. and sequester this carbon for hundreds or thousands of years. So that's the thought process behind this. This particular technique actually has been done in about 13 field trials in the Southern Ocean and other oceans. And there's very, very strong correlation between adding these limiting nutrients and seeing this primary production happen. So there's very strong evidence to suggest that this relationship between adding nutrients and seeing this growth is there. Again, the question really is then, how do we get enough of that carbon in the biomass somewhere that it's going to be sequestered for a long time? And as sort of a thought experiment here, this is an interesting natural analog that happens in Africa. So the sand from the Saharan desert actually gets blown by these really strong winds into the Mozambique Channel. And what's been observed many times is that you actually see this spark of phytoplankton growth. So this is a process that actually, it happens around the world naturally. And that's sort of a theme of a lot of these, even though they feel a little bit odd and man-made, all of these are mimicking processes that happen naturally in nature. It's just that we're asking this question of, can we do them faster and larger? Lastly, we have blue carbon restoration. This is something that I think a lot of people are quite familiar with here. We're basically looking at blue carbon ecosystems, which are traditionally mangroves, seagrass beds, salt marshes, but can also include, sometimes people include the biomass of marine mammals as well. And so this is really looking at how can we encourage the protection of these resources, because these, we know they store large amounts of carbon. So how can we protect them? And then how can we actually restore them too, to encourage further carbon storage? This one is tricky because there are very limited places where these ecosystems grow, as we know. There's also a lot of competition for this space. Whenever you have like coastal space, there's high competition. And so it's tricky in that regard, but we also know with very high confidence that this is a method that works, right? We know there's a lot of research being done on blue carbon, and we understand that when these ecosystems are thriving and healthy, they are able to store carbon in their sediments for a long period of time. So you might be wondering, okay, these are a lot of ideas. Is any of this actually happening? So yes, this is happening on kind of a small scale. So there are a handful of field trials that are occurring right now globally, not just in the United States, yes, but also in other areas. And they've been going on for about 6 years. Typically, these are done by startups who are interested in getting these ideas out of the labs and into the water. So a lot of these ideas have been researched really extensively in a laboratory setting, which is critical and is part of the process, but a lot of questions actually can't be answered in a lab, right? In a lab, you have all of these variables that are highly controlled. In the ocean, as we all know, there's not a lot of control. There are so many different variables happening, whether that's chemical or physical or biological. And these are so many that you really can't replicate it in a lab. So in order to take these ideas further and get answers to questions, we actually have to test them in the water. There are many hurdles that face these field trials, which is why we don't see a ton of them happening right now. Permitting is a huge hurdle. Public perception is also a hurdle and is tricky, but they're very critical to get the data we need so that we can answer questions and make good decisions moving forward, whether or not we want to pursue these types of solutions. Ocean Visions, the nonprofit I work for, we do a lot of work around this and a lot of thinking about this. This is a QR code. Feel free to scan it. We have a suite of knowledge products that will allow you to dive deeper into what is the state of these different approaches, right? Who's doing them? What's known? What's not known? What are the first priorities? We also have maps of where the field trials are actually happening and data on these field trials. And then we also have this database that looks at all the different players that are in this sector. And I want to emphasize, it's not just science and research that's happening here. This is a sector that touches on a lot of different fields, whether it's policy and governance, investment, research, academia, the nonprofit sector. This touches a lot of different spaces, and so there's a lot of relevance, even if you are not an ocean scientist or an ocean researcher. So this is something that touches in a lot of areas. So I want to take a moment and talk a little bit about readiness, risk, and co-benefits. So readiness varies quite a bit between these approaches, but generally it's very low. There's a lot known in the lab, but there's not a lot known in the water. And so having field trials is very important to answering all of these unanswered questions. In turn, it's very difficult to know which risks and co-benefits are most likely to occur because we have sort of this lack of information. And so we need phases of in-water testing with rigorous monitoring to answer questions and inform decision-making, because each one of these comes with a whole list of potential co-benefits, but also a whole list of potential risks. And in order to kind of step forward and make decisions, we need to have more information. So, for instance, Africa might be addressing marine carbon dioxide removal based on a series of adaptation criteria, such as looking at how this might interplay with food security, water quality, and the blue economy. There are different criteria that people are looking at in other countries, such as the US. So it's really critical to sort of choose the lens through which you're looking at this and then come up with those questions. I think it's important to note that MCDR could play a role in these pieces of adaptation that are very important and relevant to Africa. But we have this risk, and I want to talk just briefly about this idea of a comparative risk assessment. So I think it's very common that we look at some of these ideas, we understand that they carry risk, and we weigh it against this idea of no risk or no action or the status quo. And I want to challenge that idea and suggest that all of the time we are actually living in, we're making decisions, and a lot of these decisions are actively harming the ocean. So there's really no such thing as not making a decision here, right? We're actively making some choice, and so we have to compare these risks against each other, but get really clear about what the risks are that we're comparing. Monitoring, reporting, and verification is, or MRV, is a term that's thrown around a lot in this space. And sort of in very simple English, this is asking, how do we know that what we said was going to happen actually happened? So all of these methods are saying we're going to do this thing and we're going to remove carbon, which is great. But how do you actually know that you did that? Well, you have to do a lot of monitoring, you have to take a lot of measurements, and you have to do a lot of verification. And all of this is actually quite tricky to do in the ocean. Anyone who has ever tried to measure something, whether it's salinity or dissolved oxygen or carbon in the ocean, knows that these are very tricky measurements to make. They require sophisticated tools and sensors. And so this is an area that has a lot of growth that is happening, but also there's a lot more growth that needs to happen in order to actually verify what these approaches are doing. Companies are actively working on this, such as Puro Earth and Isometric. They are creating protocols, which are very important to making sure that all of this is happening in a structured and process-driven way. And I think I'm going to leave us there. I'm going to try and get us on time. So I know that was a ton of information, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of context, a little bit of scene setting about what MCDR is, why it has some relevance to this conversation and this summit. And now I am going to have these three experts have a conversation about why this is particularly relevant to Africa. So it is my pleasure to be joined by Dr. Pascal Toya. We have Caitlin Whale and we have Dr. Swari Semesi today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you in their own words, because I think that's a bit more interesting. So I'm going to pass this mic around and let them tell you who they are with, what institution or affiliation they have, and why MCDR touches down in their line of work. Okay, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am Swari Semesi. I lead the National Environment Management Council of Tanzania. It's an honor to be here, and I thank Ocean Vision for their continued support and for initiating and championing the MCDR work. Should I continue or pass them? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. I am not a doctor. My name is Caitlin Whale, and I represent a company called Kinjani. We are a venture builder and investor in ocean climate solutions in Africa. and it's really exciting to be part of this conversation. I'll hand over to Pascal.
Good afternoon. My name is Pascal Toya. I'm a researcher at Wildfish. I'm also affiliated to the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, WIOMSA, and also the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institutes. So I'm happy to be here and be part of this interesting conversation.
Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. This is going to be a little bit clunky. We have this one tiny little microphone, so we're going to be passing it back and forth, so just be patient with us. Okay, so I want to pose one first question to all of you. What unique opportunities does Africa's coastline and marine environment offer for developing MCDR approaches compared to other regions? And whoever wants to go first for this, yeah.
I'm closer to you. Thank you, Sarah. For the African continent, especially in the eastern part of the continent, we have the beautiful Indian Ocean. It's one of the tropical oceans, most part of it, and it has unique geophysiological, or whatever it is, oceanographic characteristics that are harboring the blue resources that are a natural remedy for capturing carbon. So we don't have to over-invest, but to ensure that these resources, the carbon resources are there, and we restore them. And these are the ones that are natural marine carbon removal techniques that we can use as a continent.
Awesome. I might just add, so I represent a background originally in industry, so I started in the mining sector in South Africa, which is where I grew up and where I'm based now, and then spent time in London, first in renewable energy investments, and then from venture capital funds investing into global carbon removal solutions. And we just saw this huge gap, particularly coming from Africa, that yes, we've heard so much about all the amazing resources that we have, and the southern oceans just off the coast of Cape Town are responsible for something like 35% of the ocean's carbon sequestration already. And yet so few of the innovations are coming from the continent. And so it's both an opportunity because the industry is new and how we are monitoring, reporting and verifying approaches is still being developed. But it's also something that we need to look out for, that we are encouraging homegrown solutions to scale with the scaling MCDR space.
I think it's pretty much covered in terms of the opportunity at our coastline, our shallow lagoons along the eastern side of the continent that make it really an interesting region to do MCDR projects.
Thank you, that's great. I want to dig into innovation a little bit more. And Caitlin, I'm going to pose this one to you. What kinds of African-led innovation, whether that's technological, well, let's maybe stick on technological, do you think could make MCDR a viable climate solution in Africa?
So I think this is an evolving view of my own, so I don't want to speak for the whole continent, but in terms of the opportunity area, particularly if we're looking at the resources that we have, actually instead of looking for new technological innovations, looking at what's happening around the world and where there are opportunities to partner with other innovators, and rather focus on the innovation step being how do we integrate it locally and focus on how do we co-create with communities. I think it was just last month that Pascal and I were at a WIOMSA co-design course, and we went and spoke in a coastal zone in South Africa called Saldanha Bay. There were there's this new hydrogen desalination plant hub happening. There's a lot of industrial zoning happening. And then there's also 5th generation small scale fishers all sharing the same space. And something that we haven't seen happening, I don't think anywhere, is that co-design with communities from the get-go. and how we could place importance on local indigenous know-how alongside the Western scientific know-how is an area that I'm quite excited about for how we can cultivate more homegrown innovation that has ultimate improvement to livelihoods on the ground.
You brought up communities, so I want to stick with that a little bit. What are effective strategies for involving specifically coastal communities across the continent, knowing that there are so many, it's a huge coastline, for collaboration with design, monitoring, and then the governance as well of MCDR projects? And this is to all of you, whoever wants to tackle that.
It's interesting. We are all from the eastern part of Africa, and from the eastern Africa part region, we have what we call the beach management units. These are co-management initiatives where we have the local communities, local fishers, working together, marking the areas that they fish or areas that they conserve or seasonal fishing. So we can continue with this kind of governance of the marine resources using the local communities to have certain areas that are maybe championing on issues of restoring the carbon resources, mangroves and seagrasses and so forth. But then also we have some of these groups that carrying out seaweed farming activities. So these are the tools that we can promote and ensure that the governance through the co-management using the local communities are well informed. And if we have, we want to move further from the biological means of carbon removal, then these are the ones that we should associate with. As you said, MVR is there, and we have to involve the local communities to carry such and to use their local knowledge and so forth to carry forward the MSC, marine, MRV. Thank you.
That's next. Is it not working?
Yeah. It's not working.
Am I loud enough? You can hear me? Yeah, so for me, I'll go to looking at the
Test.
The other side of climate change in terms of the impact that it has had on the communities. The coastal communities, including small-scale fishers, have already been impacted in terms of the impact of ocean acidification, coral bleaching. Their income has really declined in terms of their resources from the ocean. So looking at this alternative MCDR as an alternative source of income for these communities in terms of livelihood, like seaweed cultivation. So when you look at that angle, there's so many initiatives already out there that people are looking to, governments are looking to support communities gain alternative livelihood. So working with such initiatives that promote alternative livelihood for the coastal communities is one way that we can get into trying to motivate coastal community to do more in MCDR initiatives.
Could I add something? Yeah, just building on my colleague's comments here, partnering with existing organizations that are already in some of these communities, such as Blue Ventures, who's working with a lot of small-scale fishers, as well as in South Africa, there's a group called Seeds of Good Hope, who are going around different coastal communities to first listen, before coming in with agendas, first listen what is happening on the ground and how might this form part of a solution going forward. And I think something that we learned recently from this co-design course is the importance of co-creating with communities from the idea phase, but being very clear on managing expectations, that there still needs to be a lot of proof happening from a scientific perspective, but in parallel with that, we need to make sure that it's being developed with the stakeholders who will ensure that it might get implemented effectively down the line.
Yeah. I want to add a little bit of that. Yeah, one of the means also we can use is being innovative and promote, in restoring or governing the blue resources for MCDR is to have the blue carbon financing mechanism. So we can encourage as well as capacitate the local communities that have their hands-on into the ground. Yeah.
I want to touch a little bit more on some of these enabling conditions for responsible research, which is so important. What governance or policy frameworks do you think are most critical in Africa to ensure that these MCDR projects are done with the correct people and done responsibly?
Well, I guess I would just love to paraphrase a colleague of mine who's currently in South Africa, Professor Pedro Monteiro, there's a South African conference engaging policymakers as we speak, and what we were discussing last week is it's really important to not only look at what enabling conditions are required from a permitting perspective. So if you're co-locating with industrial supply chains like wastewater treatment works or desalination plants where there are already permits to be putting stuff in the ocean, that helps. But that's maybe on the 3-year time scale to prove on a pilot scale. We need to also be thinking about what's happening in 10 years and how can we design governance frameworks that can apply to the pilot scale and the scale from the get-go. Excuse my English. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, just I think also topping up on what you said, we need to carry this forward as a South-South partnership. We learn from each other, and then we can have these formal, informal forums that we can share and learn together. Yeah, thank you.
I think in terms of policy, another important aspect is for this MCDR to be incorporated in the national determined carbon. I think every country has obligation to report this, and it's unfortunate that at this point, maybe most of these MCDR initiative are not recognized as part of the contributors in the NDCs. So if there can be to motivate countries to have the MCDR initiative incorporated in the NDCs, then could be a good way of motivating and scaling up this project.
And use the current, what we have in the regional forums that we have, like the Nairobi Convention or WIOMSA. We use those platforms as well. And African Union. Yes.
I want to ask one question about research, knowing that 2 of the 3 of you have spent a lot of time in the research field. What role do you think international collaborations might play in ensuring that Africa maintains a leading role in the research and development in this sector?
It has been a while since I was in the lab, so I leave it to Pascal.
I have an opinion, but I'll wait until we hear from the doctor.
Since I'm the only one who is in the field, I think the biggest gap that we have is in terms of equipment. This research related to MCDR is very expensive, require a lot of laboratory work, measuring carbon units. Unfortunately, most of our institution, the university research institution, don't have this capacity in terms of infrastructure. So one thing can be a collaboration in terms of availing of this infrastructure so that these studies can be accomplished in the region. And also another aspect is the transfer of knowledge. This science is still new to many people. I think you've discussed some of this, and if you ask a question about ocean alkalization here, not so many people will be familiar with it, despite the fact that you've just mentioned it. So if we can get more experts to work with our local experts here in trying to generate more knowledge so that they can be able to replicate some of this science that has been successful in other places, so that we can also be done in our region. Thank you.
Awesome. And just to build on that, from recently engaging with innovators and researchers, for instance, in the UK, a professor from the University of Exeter who's running a pilot direct ocean capture trial in Weymouth, Secure, as well as Seaworthy in the US, we're really finding that there's a huge willingness to work together and capacity build. And from hearing from our professors in South Africa, and I'm not sure about other regions, but the potential to have that more kind of PhDs learning from postdocs who have potentially been doing trials in different locations, coming to local regions will be something that helps with the capacity development from a technical research perspective.
Thank you. Okay, I could ask you questions for another 2 hours, but I'm aware that we're coming up against our time here. So I want to ask one last question for each of you. This is a tricky one, but if you could choose, what is the single most important step that Africa should take right now to attract the right types of investment and partnerships when we're thinking about the development of MCDR?
I think for us it's just teaming up. We have the resources, we have the capacity. In terms of human resources, the continent is a young continent. We have young and innovative and energetic scientists and social sciences and so forth. So for us, it's just to focus and team up. Yeah.
I have 2 thoughts here. One is around the time scales at which we are setting ambitions, really looking at the 10-year horizon and what needs to be proven in that time scale, because there aren't going to be quick wins. But in that, if there were the potential to have a kind of open lab system, in that you could see in different regions how different approaches to ocean alkalinity enhancement, direct ocean capture, macroalgae cultivation are responding to the local region, then that will be beneficial both to those innovators as well as what could have regional impacts and could be transferred across different regions across the continent.
Mine is on development of a roadmap, which I think Ocean Vision has already made a lot of groundwork towards this. So I think the next step is to take this a notch higher, disseminate this to policymakers in the region to understand what the roadmap really means in terms of the opportunities that are there and how we can overcome the challenge that we have to make the MCDR initiative work. So dissemination, our politicians don't listen very much. They do after a very, very long time. We continue talking to them and they, hopefully they'll take this up and get it embedded in some of the government policies. Sorry, I didn't realize we have a politician.
If you're curious about this roadmap, stay here because we're going to have a session about that soon. But I want to thank all of you so much, Dr. Semesi, Caitlin, Dr. Toya. Thank you all 3 for being here and for this conversation. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that you stay. We have many more discussions happening today as well as Tuesday and Wednesday. Thank you so much. Let's give these 3 a round of applause.